As senators arrived, members of the public reminded them of their solemn duty.
Honor your oath, Senator! God bless you. Honor your oath!
To honour their oath to be impartial during one of the most bitterly divided moments in US history. Just the third time ever the Senate has been asked to remove a sitting president from office. Remember, Donald Trump has already been impeached for abusing the power of his office and obstructing Congress. But few believe there's any chance a Republican-controlled Senate will vote to force him out.
Can we still put fairness, even-handedness, and historical precedent ahead of the partisan passions of the day?
Certainly not if the rules that Republicans are hoping to pass today are anything to go by. Late last night, they released a resolution setting out plans for the trial. Both sides will be given just 24 hours over 2 days to make their case, ensuring key arguments could be buried late at night. Then senators get 16 hours only to question, but those questions must be in writing. They're not allowed to speak during the trial. And crucially, they'll be given a vote as to whether or not to allow fresh evidence and witnesses to appear.
It almost seems that the resolution was written in the White House, not in the Senate. It asks the Senate to sprint through the trial as fast as possible and makes getting evidence as hard as possible.
As Republican senators were busy trying to cut the trial to a minimum, so the president's lawyers in the White House urged them to dismiss the trial immediately on day one, saying the whole process was rigged, and not just agreeing with the president's argument, but actually repeating it, that he had done nothing wrong, and that the whole impeachment process was nothing more than bitter Democrats trying to undo the results of the last election. And where was the president as this historic trial began? In Davos, of course, at a meeting of the global elite he's so desperate to keep on side. He trotted out the standard patter.
That whole thing is a hoax. It goes nowhere because nothing happened.
But the impeachment trial is happening, whether he likes it or not.
The Senate will convene as a court of impeachment.
The president's aim now to shut it down as quickly and painlessly as possible. So ongoing right now in the Senate, there is a row about the rules of the trial. If they manage to agree that, then we will move to opening arguments. We'll hear first from the impeachment managers from the Democrat side who will lay out the arguments against the president. Then we will move to White House lawyers who will seek to defend Donald Trump. And that will be the really interesting moment because thus far, the real only defence that we've heard has been to criticise the process. It's all rigged, it's a hoax. We've heard that time and time again. But this is the show me, don't tell me moment. What is their line-by-line defence to all the evidence we've heard against Donald Trump, other than to simply state that he has done nothing wrong? After that, the next big blow-up will be the issue as to whether or not we hear from witnesses. We're told that will require yet another vote in the Senate. If that vote passes, and it's a big if, then the witnesses will first be deposed behind closed doors. If the vote does not pass, then we could see this trial be wrapped up by the end of next week, which is, of course, exactly what Donald Trump wants.
Thanks, Siobhan. Well, joining me now via the internet is Alan Dershowitz, the famed defence attorney and author of the book The Case Against Impeaching Trump, released in 2018. He'll be speaking in President Trump's defence on the Senate floor. Mr. Dershowitz, if you could just set out first why, in your view, there are no grounds for impeaching Donald Trump.
Because the Constitution sets out the only grounds for impeachment as treason. Nobody has accused him of treason, bribery. That's not one of the charges. Or other high crimes and misdemeanors. And the high crimes and misdemeanors have to be akin to treason and bribery. None of the framers would have dreamed of allowing abuse of authority or abuse of power to be a criteria, because they were very worried about vague criteria that could be weaponized by political opponents. About half of the American presidents over time have been accused of abusing their power one way or another. So I think neither of the charges that are the basis for the impeachment satisfy the constitutional criteria.
He's accused of pressuring the Ukrainian president to dig up dirt on his political rival. Don't you think the public would expect that to be punished?
Well, there are a lot of ways of punishing that. You don't vote for him the next time the election comes around, or you can have a censure of him. But just because the American public wants him punished doesn't mean that it's an impeachable offense. Impeachment is very, very rigidly restricted in the Constitution. The United States rejected broader British terms. For example, maladministration is a term that's used in Britain to impeach. But that was objected to by the framers and explicitly turned down as a ground for impeachment. They would have done the same thing with abuse of power or with obstruction of Congress. So the question is not what we think, it's what the framers of the Constitution thought.
Well, isn't the Constitution quite general on this point of high crimes and misdemeanors, though? I mean, just give us an example, in your view, of something that would, a specific example of something that would constitute that.
Very easy, what they charged Richard Nixon with. He was charged with paying hush money to potential witnesses. He was charged with erasing tapes. He was charged with telling his administrators, his assistants, to lie to the FBI. Those were all impeachable offenses. Those were all high crimes. On the other hand, President Clinton was charged with a crime, perjury, but it was a low crime, not a high crime. So I think he was improperly impeached. But Nixon was properly subject to impeachment. He knew it, and that's why he resigned.
Well, do you think that if the Democrats had framed the argument in a different way, they might have succeeded in impeaching?
Well, they didn't have the evidence to come up with bribery or treason or any other high crimes. If they did, believe me, they would have impeached on those grounds. So because they didn't have the hard evidence to come up with impeachable grounds, they came up with these vague, open-ended, general grounds. So no, I don't think they would have been able to come up with an impeachable offense. I don't think the president has committed an impeachable offense. But we don't have to reach that because the issue is whether he's charged with an impeachable offense. I'll give you an example. Let's assume a person is charged with the crime of dishonesty, and then they have a whole list of things that show how dishonesty was. Immediately, you'd move to dismiss the indictment because dishonesty is not a crime. It's a sin, but it's not a crime. The same thing here. They're just not impeachable offenses, so we don't reach the issue of what the underlying allegations are.
Do you think the public would agree with that assessment when you say there that, you know, dishonesty isn't a crime? Do you think they would expect the president to be held to a higher standard on that?
Well, nothing could be less relevant than what the public would think about what should be an impeachable offense. What's relevant is what the framers and those who wrote the Constitution and ratified thought should be an impeachable offense. I think a lot of people who hate Trump would think anything is an impeachable offense, and a lot of people who hated Barack Obama would think that anything he did would be an impeachable offense. He, too, was charged with abuse of power by Congress, and there were hearings about the abuses of power in the Obama administration, but they did not rise to the level of impeachable offenses.
Well, what happens now? Because if Donald Trump, he said repeatedly this is a witch hunt. If he believes that, should he, do you think, appear as a witness to try and scotch those claims?
Well, I've been practicing criminal law for almost 55 years. I don't think I've ever had a defendant appear as a witness. That's just not what you do when the burden of proof is on the other side. You allow the other side to present its case, and you challenge it. But it's very rare for a person accused or a defendant to testify. I would certainly not recommend that in this case.
Alan Dershowitz, thank you very much for joining us. Well, that is it for now from Davos. Back tomorrow, but over now to John in London.
Thank you, Kathy. Well, now, to get a sense of what Democrats make of the opening moves in President Trump's impeachment trial, I've been speaking to Sheila Jackson Lee, Democrat congresswoman for Texas. I put it to her that Professor Dershowitz says it's not an impeachable case in the first place.
Oh, let me disabuse you and completely reject that interpretation. I worked extensively as a member of the Judiciary Committee on the question of abuse. For commentary purposes, Alexander Hamilton said that impeachment is the process for the public man who has violated the public trust. There is no doubt that the Constitution, in its language of high crimes and misdemeanors, at the time it was written, included the abuse of power. There is something called constitutional crimes. Why? Because the Constitution is the law of the land. You can violate it and you will have perpetrated a constitutional crime, such as the abuse of your authority. The president, by illegally jeopardizing our national security, by undermining the acts of the Congress legally, as indicated by the General Accounting Office, that the president violated the law, broke the law, by asking a foreign entity to intrude and involve itself in our 2020 elections, as unfortunately happened in 2016, and then the constant pattern of obstructing the investigation by blocking any of his members or all of his members who didn't come voluntarily of his cabinet and his OMB director, his acting OMB director, former ambassador, are constitutional violations, and they are impeachable.
The issue surely now is that the Republicans are going to try and ramrod this thing through at the speed of light and try to prevent you putting any of the points you've put to us.
Well, I would say to you, it's going to be the American people who overwhelmingly desire a fair and impartial trial, and over 53% or 53% believe the president should be convicted and removed. We're going to do our job. We're going to present the evidence. We're going to continue to educate the American people. We're going to ask them, should this be the new norm when the president seeks to have the elections, the very sacred elections, presidential elections, interfered with by asking a foreign entity to investigate and to announce an investigation of a potential opponent.
Congresswoman Jackson Lee, thank you very much indeed for talking with us.
Thank you. Thank you.